But today we spend most of our efforts in Washington just trying to promote and deal with the debt. Next week, of course, the president's going to ask for another increase in the national debt by another $1 trillion. There's no serious effort to cut. And all the proposals of Congress and all the proposals of the super committee had nothing to do with cutting anything. All they're talking about is cutting proposed increases 10 years out. And even if that super committee program goes in, it doesn't go into effect until 2013. And then it cuts $1 trillion over 10 years, $100 billion a year. Guess what? Our national debt's going up $100 billion a month. And they think cutting, and that's real increases, but they're talking about proposed cuts in proposed increases. So the people are not getting a straight story, and I don't know whether they think they can deceive the people forever, or they're totally ignorant as to economic policy, or they don't have the vaguest idea how serious this worldwide economic crisis is. And I believe it is very serious, and it deserves serious attention. And the most serious thing we could do, if we come to that conclusion, is start off by cutting the budget $1 trillion in 1 year. And I think for a beginner, we can cut at least 5 departments and eliminate those and then go from there. But you know, my proposal is such where it isn't like we can wave a wand and tomorrow have our way. I do make proposals which actually come across, if anyone would pay attention, probably are more workable and more moderate than some would believe, because I want to cut the unnecessary spending and try to preserve and take care of people whom we thought to be dependent on the government. I mean, the elderly that are trying to get their Social Security money back in shouldn't be where we're balancing the budget, not on their shoulders. Same way with the medical care benefits to the elderly and the children. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't work in a direction of cutting back. Well, now, there is no doubt in my mind that the easiest place to cut should be for all Americans, conservatives, liberals, moderates, independents, anybody. The easiest place to cut should be this wild runaway spending overseas. That's where we need to cut. And the neat part about that, if you do that and change the military budget, you don't give up 1 penny of national defense, because you can have more defense with less money if we quit this nation building and the policemen of the world. We don't need to be doing that. That, of course, means we'd be bringing a lot of troops back home. Now, of course, those people out there claiming that we're so dangerous, they say, oh no, that's a dangerous idea. I wonder why the military gives me the most amount of money, twice as much as all the other candidates. Maybe they're tired of those wars as well, back and forth and contributing $4 trillion to our national debt, and we don't know when the wars are ending. And Iraq is just a shambles over there right now. There's a civil war going on, and it's not going to end pleasantly in Afghanistan. And we're supposedly over there to defend our Constitution. But how do you go to war that's not declared under the rules of the Constitution? How can these be constitutional wars? Just think how simple this problem could be solved. Don't go to war unless the Congress declares it. And under those circumstances, if the people want the war declared and the Congress votes for it, then we should all be behind it. We should fight it, know what the end point is, get it over with, and come on back home. People do have a few questions about the foreign policy of non-intervention, but it just means that we mind our own business but provide for a strong national defense. Take advice from President Eisenhower and beware of the influence of the military-industrial complex. Look to the Republican traditions in the past that talked about a strong national defense without going to endless war. Another good rule we should have is never go to rule under the authority of an international government like NATO or the United Nations. You know, I was in the service in the 1960s. I was in for 5 years. I was called up during the Cuban crisis. That was a rather dangerous period. There's no doubt about it. There were weapons on our borders and the Soviets were at their peak, and they had 30,000 nuclear missiles and weapons, and it was a rather dangerous time. But the miraculous thing that happened then was that our president at the time had the good sense to call up Khrushchev. You know, instead of saying, well, I guess what we need to do is destroy the Soviet Union with 30,000 nuclear weapons. No, he calls them up, and they get to talk, and they say, well, you have missiles, Khrushchev, you have missiles on our borders. And Kenny, oh, okay. They agree, okay, you take your missiles out of Cuba, I'll take them out of Turkey. And the crisis was solved. What's wrong with talking to people once in a while? We today now hear the sabers rattling about why we need to go into Iran. I'll tell you what, my strong opinion is we don't need to go into Iran at this point. Does this mean I don't care about them? Yeah, I care a whole lot about them. I care if they get a nuclear weapon. I'd like to see a lot less nuclear weapons in the world, not more any place. But Secretary Panetta just said this week that they're not on the verge of a nuclear weapon. The Mossad of Israel said that they're not on the verge of having a nuclear weapon. And if they did get a nuclear weapon, it would not be an existential threat to Israel. Now, that's coming from Israel. I would think that we should have at least as much debate here as they have in Israel. But the whole point is why should we be bombing or sending missiles into a country and destabilizing a country that does not even have a weapon or on the verge of a weapon? If we could withstand and contain the Soviets when they had 30,000, why are we so frightened about containing one country that doesn't even have a weapon yet? So the difference is a different approach, and my simple suggestion is that we're paying 12,000 diplomats for work. I'm suggesting that we make use of the diplomats and do a little more talking. Also, that period of time I had in the military in the 1960s was an eye-opener for me because I wasn't really a lot into politics in the early 60s about the pros and cons of the war. Of course, it didn't take me too long to get a pretty good glimpse of what was happening. But it was such a tragedy for me. Although I never went to Vietnam, I did a lot of physicals on pilots who went over there and a lot of physical on inductees that went over there. And I kept thinking, you know, some came home, some didn't come home. And then it kept going on and on. And actually the Republicans were elected in 1968 as the peace party. We were supposed to end that war. So peace sometimes can be a very popular political issue, if you haven't noticed. notice. Now, what happened was we there and wasted 60,000 lives, all that money, and you think of the millions of Vietnamese have died, at the hands of both the Americans and the French. So we leave. And the argument was we had to be there because there was a big domino effect and communism would spread over that whole land. Well, China, they backed off. They became our banker. They thought that was a better deal than being communist anymore. And now Vietnam, they're our friends. We trade with them. We talk with them. We go back and forth. They're far from perfect, but I'm working on making ourselves more perfect than worrying about the Vietnamese. But just think of what was achieved since we decided to quit the war in Vietnam and work through peaceful means, how much more was achieved through peace than with war. And there's reasons for war. War's been around a long time. It's going to be around. That's why we have the military. That's why I was in the service. That's why I want a sensible foreign policy, because I want a stronger national defense, not a weaker national defense. I don't want to waste money, and I don't want to waste lives, and I don't want to fight wars that are unnecessary. And there's no reason in the world that you can't stand tall and say that you are cautious about going to war, and you don't need to endorse war to prove that you're an American or you're supporting the troops. Matter of fact, the opposite is the case sometimes. Now, another casualty of the wartime atmosphere happens to be personal liberties here at home. Whether it was during World War II when the Japanese were rounded up and put into concentration camps, it's just that people seem more ready to give up liberties if they're convinced that that we're in this major war. I have a personal belief, though. I don't care what the circumstances are. I don't think you're ever safer by giving up any of your liberty, no matter what the government tells you. So what has happened recently, of course, right after 9/11, I supported going after Al-Qaeda. I was very disappointed it took, 10 years. I was also disappointed that they didn't look at one of my suggestions rather than invading countries and occupying countries that literally didn't participate in Al-Qaeda and hitting us over here. But what we need to do, my suggestion back then was, why don't we revive the principles the founders gave us called the letter of marque and reprisal, which means that you keep your eye on the target. If you don't want to declare war against that country, and we didn't have a precise country to declare war against, you declare war against the criminality of the international criminals they used in our early history against the pirates. This would have been a wonderful opportunity to narrow the target and direct the attacks on those individuals instead of going into nation building. But the attack on personal liberties has continued. First, after 9/11, it was the Patriot Act. The Patriot Act was not invented. It was not invented because of 9/11. It had been invented several years before. An opportunity arises for those who like to put those kind of laws on us, saw that as an opportunity. So within a week or two, the Patriot Act was passed. And I think the best name for that, and if we could have renamed it, it wouldn't have passed. Because some people voted for it because they thought nobody could vote against the Patriot Act. But if they'd have called that the repeal of the Fourth Amendment Act, maybe nobody would have voted for it then. Because that's essentially what it did, and we have lost our privacy. They can invade our homes without legitimate search warrants. They can come in our houses, look around and search and take things, and then if you know they're in your house and you tell somebody, you become a criminal for just informing your attorney the government was in your house and searching your papers. So that has gone a long way. But we've done a few things, our country has tolerated here in the last few months. And that is the National Defense Authorization Act. Very, very bad piece of legislation, although some voted for it because they figured there were some good things in it. But you don't vote for the bad just to get some good passed. If it's bad, it's bad. You shouldn't vote for it. But the provisions in there essentially have repealed posse comitatus. The president now is allowed to use the military to arrest any American citizen as a probable cause and associated forces associated with a group that might be dangerous, which means maybe visiting a website, attending a meeting, becoming anti-war, who knows what. And you're an associated force that you can be targeted and arrested. Not only can you be arrested by the military, that's only half of it. You can be kept in secret confinement indefinitely and denied an attorney, and that is not part of what America should be. No, bills like that should be, if we're going to restore the Republic, we would be repealing the Patriot Act as well as this authority to arrest American citizens by the U.S. Army. That should not be permissible. A lot of people ask me, you give these dire warnings, and you've done this before, but do we really have enough time to save our republic? Well, I wouldn't be up here if I didn't think we did. And and I don't place it all on myself, because there's something much bigger than me going on in this country. It's been going on for 4, 5, 6 years, and it's growing by leaps and bounds. And that is the freedom movement. People really are understanding what's going on. If we do nothing, though, the status quo will drive us down. The bankruptcy of the country will lead to chaos, and then these arrests may be set up for a particular reason, because the riots in the streets will come if we can't take care of people who are expecting a little bit of care. But we can't continue this wild spending overseas and the wild entitlement spending here. It won't work. The end point will be a monetary financial event. We cannot bail out Europe, even though Bernanke's over there promised he will. He's available if there's a financial crisis, because our banks have branches over there, and those banks over there bought all that, sovereign debt, and this debt isn't worth anything, and the banks are in hook with the derivatives. Same old argument they gave us in 2008. They're going to do it again. But there's always a limit. You just can't print money forever, to the point where finally the people give up confidence. But this time, it's different. It's bigger, more pervasive, more global, and every currency is tied together. Even the Chinese, as independent as they are, and as much wealth as they have trillions of our dollars, and they inflated their own currency with the use of the dollar. So we're intertwined. It is unsustainable, so we're going to have to deal with that. So for me, it's not complicated. It's looking to what made America great, and that is our individual freedoms and property rights and contract rights and sound money and personal liberty. We have to understand what personal liberty is all about. If you understand liberty, you understand rights. You understand, of course, it's most important that we understand where our life and liberty comes from. And for me, it comes from a creator. It doesn't come from our government. Now, if we have a natural right to our life and our liberty, we should have a natural right to the fruits of our labor, which, of course, that would mean that the tax code wouldn't exist. There wouldn't be any need for it. But this is what we have to do. But the big question is, how do you bring enough people together? And a lot of people say, well, Ron, you have good ideas and we sort of like it, but you got to compromise on this in order to get some people over here to come over here and join together. I think in many ways what I've observed in Washington for 30 years has been way too much compromise. They come together. The two sides The two sides come together. Those who might want to spend money on domestic welfare get together with those who might want to spend money overseas, and they come together and they keep building, and they don't believe there's a crisis going on. So they have compromised too much. What we need, though, are building coalitions. Everybody has an interest in freedom. And when they understand this should bring people together. The easiest way for people to understand this is we do understand pretty well in this country about religious liberty. We know that you have a right to practice your religion. We know you have a right not to practice religion if you don't want. But if we could translate that into all personal behavior as well as all economic behavior, it's your life. You run your life, don't hurt anybody, don't steal from everybody, you suffer the consequences of the way you run your life. You can practice your religion as you see fit, you can run your intellectual life as you see fit, and you have the right to spend your money as you see fit. All of a sudden, you see people agreeing, yeah, I like my freedom here, I like my freedom for this. So you come together, but you don't have to be judgmental and say, oh, he's using his freedom the wrong way. I want him to use his freedom the way I use my freedom. No, you can't do that. You have to be tolerant. People say, oh, no, you can't be tolerant. What if they do something that you don't like? Tolerance does not mean endorsement. Because you tolerate freedom of choice in religion and somebody becomes an atheist, that doesn't mean that you endorse atheism. So we need to be more open about this. That is the only way we can bring the people together. It is the way you bring diversity together because it's a common cause, and the common cause is liberty. Liberty is what made this country great. It is the issue that made our country prosperous. It is the issue that gave us the biggest, largest, and richest middle class. And if we don't do it, we're going to lose it. So it's on the line. But I am encouraged. I've spoken out a long time, but there is a difference in the land today. And it's growing. I talk a lot about the young people. But as far as I'm concerned, everybody in this room is under 30. Very good. Now, it is a great cause, and one thing I talk about a whole lot, it's very serious, and we ought to have fun doing it because you'll meet allies. You meet allies in this room, and you understand it, and you bring people together. So to me, this is a serious matter. I think it's going to be resolved, maybe not in a week or two or a month or two or a year or two, but soon. It's going to be resolved because we do not know at the end point. We do not know that point when the bubbles burst. But it could happen tomorrow. It could happen a year or two or three. But when it happens, we better be prepared. And that is why I am delighted to come and visit with like-minded people who are interested and willing to lead the charge for the cause of liberty. Thank you very much.